Welcome to Bright America Live. Hope you've had a nice week. I am excited to be joined by two of the leaders of the Cost Coalition, an organization that Bright America is supporting around the affordability push to ensure that both parties are focused on cost of living and engage more Americans around that. Andrew Bates, former White House Deputy Press Secretary under President Joe Biden, is joining us. And we've got Terry Holt, Republican strategist for George W. Bush and others. And so we're excited to have them with us and to have this conversation. A lot of our thoughts today are around tariffs and how the president is now reinstating the tariffs, and we haven't seen exactly, what those results will be yet because it's been on again, off again. And so we want to talk a little bit about, what this means for an American's top pocketbooks, what it means for Americans that are just now paying attention to, the prices going up in their grocery stores, and how it's going to ultimately affect the politics going forward. And so the Cost Coalition's focus really is around, can we maintain the driving focus on costs in the affordability crisis in America? Can we ensure that those people that are struggling every day to make ends meet, are they being approached with policies that are actually going to lower their costs? Or are those policies actually increasing those costs? And so, I'm going to get started with Andrew. Why is this? We've talked about this coalition and how it's, you know, nonpartisan. Really, it's focused on just the driving factors of our costs. Why is it so important to include, people of all political beliefs and those people that aren't focused on politics at all?
I think that the Cost Coalition is really about listening to everyday people. And overwhelmingly, the top priority that people have, whether they're a Republican, a Democrat, anything else, whether they're apolitical, is affordability. You see that in every way people know how to express it. They want their leaders to be focused on bringing costs down. And like you were getting at, tariffs do the opposite. A tariff is a regressive tax that disproportionately hurts people who do not have a lot of money. And at the same time, it raises costs. And there are a lot of people who are counting on costs going down when this administration and when these new congressional majorities came into office, but now they're feeling that pain of higher costs. And Terry and I wanted to make sure that we're doing our part to listen to folks and work with like minded people to try and oppose some of these policies that are making life harder.
And talk to me, Andrew. For the Bright America audience, which is really a smart audience, they're up to speed on, the politics of the day. They're following the legislation. Why is it important? Can you tell them why it's important for Democrats to understand the importance of rising costs in the coming year and for 2026?
Yeah, it's because that is what is foremost on the minds of voters who Democrats need to reach. And it's the kind of issue that helps you build a majority because, like we were talking about, it's something that everybody cares about. Everyone cares about their family being able to have some breathing room, being able to get ahead, building a better future for their kids, for themselves. And that is almost always going to be every American's top priority, regardless of where they're from, what their faith is, or anything else about them. That if you want to get the faith of voters, you have to show them that you understand what they care about most, and that is costs and affordability, and they want to see that you're fighting for them. So if we keep a disciplined focus on costs and we call out some of these policies that are hurting folks like this big ugly bill, I think that that's the right path to take.
I think about myself as someone who, is working hard to provide for my family, to ensure that, my child has exactly what they need growing up, and has exactly what I had growing up. And it's harder and harder for people these days to feel like, they're at the same level as their parents. But Terry, you and I worked in Republican politics a long time. Um, and I saw, in my 20 years working in Congress, there were people that cared about the costs and ensuring, Americans were, um, paying lower prices within Congress on both sides. But I felt like there was never really a focus on the affordability, driving affordability for Americans. Why do you think, why do you think Republicans often talk about fiscal responsibility, but then don't follow through with, how that's going to impact Americans?
Right. Well, you talk about putting policies in place that help the working family, and then you talk about uh, the rising cost to deal with the economy in a macro sense, like with tariffs. And I think what we've seen in the Republican Party is that they approach the cost equation more from a business oriented standpoint, that American free enterprise left to its own devices is going to lift all boats, that investment in the economy and innovation will create jobs that are good for the working. President George W. Bush pushed through with Democrat support the prescription drug benefit in Medicare. That was a huge cost saver for citizens. And policies like that along the way come through the Republican Party with bipartisan support. Um, the particular, when you talk about what it take to build a majority in the country going into an election, I know that Andrew can talk about the Democrats, but I'm looking at the Republicans too. That there are several issues that Republicans have held as bedrock: free enterprise, free trade, and uh, fiscally responsible, as you pointed out. And the Trump team has so far largely turned its back on those sorts of traditional, with the tariffs and with the spending cuts that are now going into tax cuts for the rich. I think that this is perilous ground for the Republican Party. I think that Donald Trump may be turning his back on the middle class at his peril. And so the majority that will be made in the next election, whether that's in Spanberger's election in Virginia or that's the midterm elections in 2026, it's going to be the party that can um, talk to a group of people that were in play in the last election and could be in play in the next election. And that's people that come together based on cost, but also on access to the American dream. Are they getting ahead or are they falling behind? And I think the Republicans did appeal to those people in the last election. So they have a special burden to pay those folks back for their support at the ballot box in the last election.
Yeah, and let's get to the tactics. Let's get to the real meat of it. I was in President Trump is in Texas right now. He's gone down for the flooding. I'm from San Angelo, an area that got 11 inches of rain, and I was there during it. And so please pray for everybody that has lost family members right now. But one of the things, I was watching the news the whole time that I was in Texas. And, my parents are Fox News watchers. They watch Fox News, they listen to talk radio. And so I was subjected to that over the course of the week as I was watching the reports on the flooding. But beyond the flooding, Fox News was also focused on the passage of BBB, the big bill, and they had member after member of Congress on Fox talking about how that bill is great, it's fantastic, there is nothing in it that you won't like, and there was no counter to that. There was absolutely zero counter to that messaging, given what we know about the bill, what we know what's in the legislation, how it's going to affect costs for everyday Americans. So Terry, this is an echo chamber that you are familiar with. You
Right.
understand, been involved with it. Um, Selling this legislation as a win, even as it risks driving costs, is that going to work? Long term.
I think it's going to work with a certain group of people that really are already on board with the Trump campaign's essential value proposition that they're going to be there to upset the system and that they're disruptors of the status quo. But I don't think that's a majority anymore. I think I think that all of us expect the economy to get better. And I think that as we've seen with the blowback with the big beautiful bill, um, that there are people who are very skeptical. When you talk about Fox News and talk radio, I sympathize. I go back to Indiana, and like your parents, my parents also are Fox News watchers. And what we see there is a very one-sided thing. And I just say, really, it's about the insurgent media that was 25 years ago has now become state media. And it has all the bells and whistles and all the multi platform social media reach that you would have with the most sophisticated operation in the country. And we don't really, on the left, have something that's equivalent to that. Um, the legacy media is cowed by status quo, and whoever's in the office of president is going to have the benefit of the doubt largely from that media. We also need to do a better job of inserting opposition into those outlets where it's possible. Other voices insisting on being in these places, having content that counters it, like Andrew and I have. We've appeared on the Fox News op ed page talking about the debt and the tax cuts. There needs to be an active engagement to push back on that and to not be afraid. It's not a monolith. We've seen over the course of the last several weeks with this Jeffrey Epstein story, you really have MAGA outgrowing some of its creators and Bondi and in some of the other folks, Cash Patel, who all got famous and got rich talking about that. And now that they're in office, they see that MAGA can come after them too. So it's an incredibly complicated beat, but it has to be addressed by the left, by the center, with facts and with arguments like cost and affordability and the American dream. That's where you meet those people where they live.
So, and Andrew, what about this counter messaging? How can Democrats really engage here, and how can the Cost Coalition help make this case that the Democrats need to really engage in these media, spaces that are comfortable?
I think Terry hit the nail on the head that, first of all, you have to be willing to go into spaces like Fox News or other conservative leaning media that may not be most hospitable to you, but are a critical opportunity for you to make sure that a lot of persuadable folks are actually hearing your point of view because, like you're getting at, many of them might never hear it otherwise. I also think that it means being honest with people about what is happening right now. It is clear that Trump and a lot of his allies told people what they believed they wanted to hear in 2024. But I don't know a single American who thinks that words matter more than deeds. Now they have power, and you're seeing how they are using it. And if we look back over these past 6 months, the more that people learn about the actual record, the more that they rightly feel they've been betrayed. The tax hike that the tariffs are is the biggest increase on working people since the Great Depression. And the revenue from those tariffs goes directly to the rich establishment that Donald Trump was promising he would stand up against. the kinds of folks that he said were suffocating opportunity for everyday people. I know you talked, Austin, about there are a lot of Americans, whatever their political views, who are concerned that the future may not be as bright for them as it seemed when they were kids or as it was for their parents. And what you saw with this big ugly bill is more of that kind of betrayal. It is these deficit increasing tax giveaways for billionaires paid for by taking healthcare and food away from people who are struggling. It's literally the opposite of what they were promised. And so I think what Democrats need to do is call that out and prove that we are fighting for people to have an honest chance, to have opportunity, to be able to build wealth and get ahead and be fulfilled.
Yeah, you make a really interesting case there about the need to kind of tie the policy with what's actually happening on the ground. And that's what the Cost Coalition is really doing. It's like telling, framing the message around like, hey, this policy, which, as we've seen in the last day, President Trump is now putting new tariffs on Canada, new tariffs on all nations across the country. There was kind of a a pause in the tariffs over the last 90 days or so. And so that changed the economics. A lot of uh, uh, the thoughts on the economy, would we be in an inflationary period? But it's been back and forth. People are kind of struggling to know where the economy is going to go. And so that gets confusing for Americans. It's like, what is really happening? What's going on when a policy's on, a policy's off, and the long-term impacts to the economy and to the prices at the grocery store, prices for your mortgage. Um, Going to you, Terry, like how do the Republicans justify these tariffs, and how are they going to make the case if the tariffs are going to be lowering the costs? I don't see that.
Well, you're asking me to be the spokesperson for ideology, at least on tariffs, that I don't really abide by. But the idea, as they've tried to communicate, and I think very poorly, is that by protecting American uh, jobs and American manufacturing and American work here in America, you're going to make the country stronger. But this is a global economy where most of us have interaction with companies across state lines, across party lines, and across national lines. And so as we are the leader in this global economy, we're best in a position to take advantage of that. So I think this current flirtation and perhaps complete love affair with tariffs on the part of the Republican Party is a disaster. It's even more regressive as a tax on middle income people than even those tax cuts for the rich. It's a disaster for innovation and for our ability to sell our goods and services across the borders. And I want to say you were talking about how tariffs were on and then off. No, tariffs are on right now. Tariffs came into effect on Liberation Day, and he gave us 90 days to do 90 deals. He didn't do any deals. And then he moved the goalposts again here recently till August 1st to do more deals. But there's still tariffs that have been put in place on Canada, on Mexico, and a 10% rate on everybody else. So people are feeling that now. That is in people's lives today. And as they think about their position going into the next election, that's going to be a determining factor more so than their party affiliation. And when you look at party ID against this big ugly bill right now, it's true that independents and Democrats are very opposed to the bill. And even Republicans had some misgivings. Those numbers are coming back for Republicans. The state media, the Fox stuff is working on that group. The big battle is going to be for the hearts and minds of the American people over the next 18 months about whether tariffs are a good idea, about whether the big ugly bill really does got the social safety net, really does reward the rich in favor against the poor. I mean, we'll have that percolate in our conversation. What we want to do is realize right away that the left will be outspent and outworked by the right if things go as they are today. The MAGA movement and the Trump people have all of the resources at their disposal, and it will be a real battle. They have tried to change public opinion before. You know, Donald Trump tries to change public opinion about Russia, Putin, for example. So he's going to try to change public opinion about both of these policies in the next 18 months, and we're in for a battle. And I'll stop there.
That's right. I mean, and Andrew, I'm seeing some questions here. What can we do right now? What can pragmatic people that really want to engage in this effort and have a voice? What you worked in the White House. Like, what's gonna have impact at this moment, at this time right now?
I think one of the best quotes I ever heard about political messaging is from a former RNC chair, Haley Barbour, and it is, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. I think that, to Terry's point, there is a much bigger media apparatus available right now to the right and to who is in the White House. And one of the ways that we have to make sure we counter that effectively is by repeating our message about cost, about how the tariffs are raising people's taxes, raising everyday prices, so the rich can get a tax cut, which also hurts our economy. We have to repeat that beyond the point where we are tired of hearing ourselves say it, because it's not about reaching us. We don't want to be preaching to the choir. We want to grow the congregation, and we have to keep that front of mind. Something that I also think is very telling is, if you look at what the White House is talking about now, they're talking about anything but their signature legislative accomplishment, because they know that they just screwed people over. They know that it's not going to do what they promised. In fact, you're already having hospitals closed down. A hospital closed in Nebraska because of these Medicaid cuts. There are going to be millions of people who voted for them, who gave them their trust, who are going to feel real change that it could ruin your life financially. And we have to hold them accountable for it and show them that there is a common sense way to lower costs and make sure that rich special interests are finally paying their fair share.
See, I would just jump in because, one of my first campaigns was a brutal campaign that was made brutal because of a plant closing. One plant closing in the major media market, that congressional district. It made that district unsafe for the incumbent, that he'd lost those jobs. And those kinds of stories are going to play out in America over the next several years as we see this long-term decline through these policies. And so what I think back on is the importance of what Andrew said, of staying on message, of connecting it to the local outlet, so that people are hearing these stories and talking about them at their kitchen table, at their workplace, their FOP lodge, and in other places around the community.
Okay, I want to switch it a little bit to debt and deficit, because I think, along with tariffs, that is going to be the issue that's going to slowly eat away at the American cost of living over the next decade or so.
No doubt.
We're already seeing it with the high interest rates, the high mortgage rates. It's going to cost more and more for people to have the standard of living that they have now or their parents had. And an article that came out, and I'll link it to the post once we put it out, but the New York Times, Jared Bernstein, Andrew, you work with Jared in the White House. He was Biden's chief of what was it? Chief economist, or
Yeah, he was the the head of the Council of Economic Advisors.
yeah, chair. So he was the chair, and he wrote. He said he was a dove on deficit. He was not a hawk. He was someone that felt like we could continue to spend. But now he's come out and has changed his mind because of the interest rates and the level of growth in America. Now, obviously the critics are going to say, "Oh, now you tell us this. Now you say that deficit's a huge issue. Why didn't you talk about this? When you were in the White House 2 years ago?" So, what does this mean when we're having a former colleague of yours sound this alarm now? And how do you respond to those critics that would say that today?
The first thing I would say is that in the White House, we fought the whole time to bring in more revenue from billionaires, from big corporations, and we were blocked by the MAGA wing in Congress. There were some Republican members who wanted to be open minded and have a dialogue about that, but it was a non starter for a lot of the MAGA wing of Republicans in Congress to do that. I think if you take the long term view on how America's debt has increased over decades, it's true that no party's hands are clean. It doesn't mean that people weren't making decisions in good faith and doing the best they thought they could in the moment. I mean, for example, we had the American Rescue Plan. It was a fiscal stimulus bill at the very start of the Biden administration. And the reason we did that is because the pandemic had caused the worst financial crisis of our lifetimes. It was the most vulnerable that America's economy had been since the Great Depression. And that stimulus did contribute to debt, but it also made sure that we had the strongest recovery of any nation in the world. If you compare us to our peers who were going through the same kinds of hardships, we came out ahead of them by every metric. So there are trade-offs like that. But what struck me the most about Jared's piece is the latest big addition to the debt, the big ugly bill, was something that was not a response to a crisis. It was not a response to a pandemic or some kind of a global downturn. It was just a big payoff to Donald Trump's billionaire donors, to the Mar-a-Lago set, at the expense of everybody else and all of our futures and the expense of our national competitiveness, which he's hurting in other ways too. And so I think to have somebody like Jared, who I did work with for many years, I have a lot of respect for him, somebody to say, listen, I considered myself a dove for many years, but because of how large the debt is now, because interest payments on our debt are exceeding the growth rate, we're in real trouble. And we have to look at changing course. And I agree with him. And I think there are a lot of people across the political spectrum who do.
Yeah, and I think there is a growing number of people that are taking this seriously and have changed their minds, and I welcome that. I think it's something that's really important. And Terry, for the Republicans, there's definitely people that are in the Republican Party that care about this. That this is a top issue for them, uh, but it's not shown in the policies. It's not shown in the legislation. Do you think? How do you think? Um, how do you think this is going to be addressed long term with the current, with our current politics?
Do you mean, are you asking me whether or not the Republicans are going to do something about the debt while they have control of the government?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's a question, but also, do you think that there can be a coalition of sane people that can come together and push both parties?
Right, right. Well, yeah, I think you have thinkers and institutions around town that do push the debt narrative as part of the long term economic decline that our country faces, unless we turn and change course. Republicans haven't been able to resist the urge to take the American economy and bend it to their economic will. And I don't think that's anymore really a viable place. I think there are people that are legitimately concerned about it. We saw a poll about 2 months ago that said about 80%, if they were asked, do they think debt is an important issue? About 80% of average Americans thought that it was an important issue. That's not to say the biggest issue, but we need to connect the debt narrative to the cost narrative. This, the inflationary aspects of it, the way that it pinches our ability to serve people through government like like food and Medicare and healthcare and Medicaid. Um, if we don't have the money to support those services, then this government is going to crash. I think the more voices like coming out of the Biden administration that provide a safe space for Democrats to talk about it. It'll be a real test for the Democrats next year. They take control of the Congress to put out some kind of economic plan that acknowledges the importance of addressing the debt and provides an opportunity to begin another conversation with those debt hawks that do exist on the conservative side, even if they're not in control of the party, even if they're not real MAGA supporters.
So I put out a article on Bright America this week about the Mandami win and how he focused on the cost of living crisis in New York, and also about Trump and how he has focused, his communication has been around making sure that he raises people up through making America great again. They're both talking in a populist frame on the finding solutions to these problems and giving easy answers. No cost of no tax on tips or free buses from the dummy. Is there room to for folks that are more pragmatic, that want serious solutions to these long term issues, to have new innovative solutions? Is there room for a non populist approach? And I'll throw it to both of you on that because I don't have the answer, but I think the Cost Coalition is doing the right thing about bringing people together around that.
I think that if you look at what Abigail Spanberger is doing in Virginia, which is the most purple state where there is an election happening right now, she's talking about affordability more than anything else, which reflects that she's listening to people. And you're right that the common theme between Trump and between Mamdani and others who've succeeded wherever they are politically is they have been focused when they campaign on costs. Of course, Trump has not been focused on costs while governing, but that is how they campaigned. And I think that people who are running for office from a center left perspective need to make sure that we do not cede that issue, that we instead are putting forward solutions like bringing in the right amount of revenue from those who are doing very well. Our economy often is at its best when that's taking place. And I think that we need to own that and make sure we're speaking up and meeting people where they are, going places like Fox News and other podcasts and being enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, I think the whole populist appeal of those two candidates, Trump and Mondami, really speaks to the cost equation that people are facing in America. So I pretty much agree with Andrew on all fronts. I do think that the Democratic Party careful not to embrace too closely that model in New York because ultimately America is a whole lot less like New York than it is Virginia or New Jersey or what we'll see in the 2026 election, some of the targeted. So I think that a more pragmatic approach, your question, when it comes to strategy is going to be necessary. And that some of the folks that are in our broader coalition on the progressive side are going to really need to embrace the fact that the economy is what drives and organizes as we see it in the current climate.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that the New Democrats coalition, which is a part of House Democrats, it's the largest caucus of House Democrats, has shown important leadership on this. They put out an economic plan that is explicit about the need to bring debt down, which I thought was encouraging. And I think that there's a lot that can be built on with that kind of a move. And I also think that there are a lot of Democrats who I think feel as though if they talk about the economy more than other things, it means they don't care about other priorities. And that's a false choice. I think it's just a reality of listening to people and trying to earn their support that you figure out what do they care about most, and you need to prove to them that you're going to fight for them on that. And I think that opens the door to them listening to you about other issues too. It's how you start a conversation, not how you end it.
Well, and that's what the Cost Coalition is doing. It is focused on, those stories, making sure people are aware of, those local issues that are keeping that local story up front, up center for members of Congress, for other people in the local sphere. And now we've got a cost caucus in the House that the Cost Coalition formed. Do y'all want to, wrap up a little bit this conversation talking about that and anything else you think the Bright America audience should be aware of?
Sure.
Yeah, that's right. We did launch a cost caucus in the House, and we're looking forward to working with them and growing it over time. I think that there's a lot of room for members to come together and show their constituents that they understand their number one priority is affordability, and that's where they're putting their energy. That's a good way to keep a good relationship with folks back home. It's a good way to stay in office. And it's a good way to try and make a better future for the country because it's affecting not just how people do financially when you're looking at numbers, it's affecting national morale. And I think it's smart for leaders to really show people that they get it and they're going to keep talking about it and doing real work on it.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Terry, anything to close out?
I just want for the Republicans are still part of this dialogue and conversation. I think that I would inspire folks that live in red states to not be shy about engaging in these conversations, even if you're taking positions that are contrary to some of the MAGA dogma of the moment, that we need your voices. You can come to the Cost Coalition for local stories and a national narrative that'll help you talk about it. Join us on X and check us out and help us get the message out.
Yeah, thank you both. And yeah, Cost Coalition is also on Substack and costcoalition.org. Bright America is going to continue to support this work, continue to ensure that this message is getting out because we think reaching these voters that are not completely focused on politics all the time is key. And the way you do that is you talk about the issues that they care about most, which is affordability right now in America. So, hope everyone has a great weekend. Thanks so much, y'all. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.